Hi there, Emily Midgett here with you today on the Pinkfresh Studio YouTube channel, and today I have a pretty in pink card with lots of shades of pink and lots of different textures on it. So let's get started with the details. I have the Dreamy Florals hot foil plate and die, which I have hot foiled on some watercolor paper using rose gold, and then I've also used the Pinkfresh solid hot foil plate to also die cut or hot foil the negative space as well. I have the Thank You So Much hot foil plate and die, the Dotted Scallops cover plate, and the Artistic Blossoms, as well as the Slim Ornate Banner dies. So lots of dies, lots of different textures going on this project today. So today I thought we would do a little bit of back to the basics for watercoloring. I'm going to show you how you can create 3 different intensities of different watercolored vibrant colors with using one shade of watercolor. I've got quinacridone pink Daniel Smith watercolor here, and this is just this very first little swatch that I'm doing. This is created using undiluted color. That's the top of the swatch that you see. That is undiluted quinacridone pink. This second little swatch that I'm creating, I have added a little bit of water to it, and then I am putting that on my watercolor paper and cleaning my brush and pulling that color out with clean water on my paintbrush so that you can see that it smooths into a nice fade, but you can definitely see the difference between the dark first version and the kind of medium colored second version. Now this last version, we've added a lot of water to that quinacridone pink, so it's an even paler version than that middle version. That we've got kind of a dark, medium, and light versions here. So now I have taped down the Dreamy Hot Foil or Hot Florals plate watercolor panel to my watercolor board, and I am just dropping in. I've wet my paper completely, and I am using a very large paintbrush. This is a number 12 round. I've covered that with water, and I'm dropping in that really diluted, that number 3 of that quinacridone pink. I'm dropping in really diluted little dollops of color and allowing that wet watercolor paper to allow that color to bloom, and it spreads. That's one of my favorite features of watercolor, is that when you have the wet watercolor meet damp watercolor paper, that watercolor just spreads out so beautifully and organically. It's such a wonderful effect. So I am adding little bit of extra saturation around certain areas of this of these images because I want to create a lighter colored image in the center. I want to have that contrast between the light and the dark. So I have, we're going to work with the foliage first, and I'm going to create, this is the dark, this is the undiluted, super saturated quinacridone pink for this foliage. So I am just picking up very, very concentrated quinacridone pink with my paintbrush, cleaning my paintbrush off, dabbing it on my stamp chamois so that it's nice and damp, and pulling that color out with the very tip of my paintbrush. You can see that I keep the point of the paintbrush pointed away from me all the time to make sure that I have the most control over where that color is going. And one of my favorite things about watercoloring on hot foiled images is that it's almost like emboss resist technique, where you have this resistance happening with the lines of the hot foil. So you can create these really neat effects with where the foil does not hold on to that watercolor. It allows you to kind of maneuver that watercolor around, and it resists holding on to that watercolor. So I love the effect. It's such a fun way to get more out of your hot foil plates. So again, I'm using this is very, very concentrated pink watercolor. I'm picking up very dark pink, laying it down on my watercolor paper and pulling that watercolor out with my clean damp paintbrush. And we're going to do that for the foliage. I want the foliage to be really deep, dark, saturated pink. So that's why we're using the undiluted pink watercolor on the foliage. You can see how intense and vibrant that is. It's just that, and the quinacridone pink is one of my favorite watercolor shades out of all of the many, many watercolors that I have. So you can see the finished product with all of the foliage in that dark pink. And I'm going to use the kind of middle ground. I'm going to use the slightly diluted version number 2 of that quinacridone pink for the flower itself, the large flower image in the middle of that bouquet. So I've taken some watercolor from my watercolor pan, dabbed it on onto my ceramic palette, and then I've added just a touch of water to it so it's a little bit diluted. There's a little bit more water. Think of adding the water as like adding white paint. When you add that water in there, it makes the intensity of the color less. It softens the color a little bit. And we want a contrast between those super bright, intense leaves and the flower itself to be a little bit lighter and a little bit softer and a little bit less intense. So I've added a little bit of water to that watercolor that I've dabbed onto my ceramic palette. And this is just very basic watercoloring. I'm not doing anything really, really fancy here. I dab a little bit of color towards the center of the flower on each petal, where that flower petal would meet in the center of the flower, where it's kind of tucked underneath the petals on top. And then I'm cleaning off my brush, dabbing it on my stamp chamois, and I'm pulling that color out with that clean paintbrush. But you can see that there is definitely a difference between the kind of medium pink of the flower and the really dark, intense, saturated pink of the leaves. We're going for that contrast to kind of, we want what I had in my head was kind of a chinoiserie. I think I've pronounced that correctly. I don't know. I'm not French. Kind of that monochromatic toile, beautiful antique pottery look is what I was going for. With just one set of colors on this card. That's what I wanted. I wanted to create as monochromatic as possible. So again, I'm just adding little dabs of color, cleaning my brush, pulling that color out with that clean, damp paintbrush until I have all of the petals. I work each petal individually to make sure that there is contrast and definition between each petal so that it doesn't kind of look like one big blob. Now that I have all of those kind of interior petals finished, I am going to go back in and I'm going to add a little bit of extra intensity to those petals that are really in the shadow in my head, that are really tucked underneath and really would have some extra intensity in that area where it kind of meets in the middle, where it would be the most shadowed. I want to intensify those shadows and create even more contrast between the lighter petals in front and the darker petals in the back. Add those shadows, and that helps to add a little bit of extra shape and dimension to your flower. Now, these petals that are in the front that are curled upward and that are in the very, very front of this flower, those are going to use number 3. Those are going to be the lightest and most diluted color that we have. Just a very light hint of pink. So you can see the differences of what adding water does, how different you can create so many different shades by just adding a little bit of water to one shade of watercolor. I think that's so much fun. So here I am using my Thirsty brush. I want those little sprigs to be light pink, very, very light, almost white. So I am taking my paintbrush and dabbing clean water in there and kind of scrubbing that area a little bit, and then taking a Kleenex or a paper towel and picking that color up with that Kleenex. It just helps add a little bit of extra variation of that quinacridone pink. So now I am taking the Dotted Scallops cover plate, and I have created a full-size slimline pink card base, and I am using this, I'm running that through my die cut machine twice with that scalloped cover plate to create that full-length slimline background. So now I have the slim ornate banner, and I am just going to create a little kind of a ground to arrange my flowers on. I've die cut that slim ornate banner from some vellum, some heavyweight vellum cardstock. So this is the Thank You So Much hot foil plate. I've hot foiled it in rose gold, the same as I used for the flowers. And I am just taking ballet slipper ink and blending brush and blending over the top of it, because all of the elements of this card are pink. I don't want any white. That just, to my mind, that just makes the card ruined. So I am taking that pale pink ink and blending over the top of my rose gold hot foiled sentiment. I'm going to use the coordinating die and die cut this out, and we're going to trim that so much off. We're going to trim the bottom part of this die cut off and just create just a plain old thank you. because the way that I had this arranged in my head, it was just a little bit too much. So we're going to simplify things a little bit and do some trimming. Now I have taken the Artistic Blossoms dies, and I've die cut them from some rose gold glitter foam. We're going to combine the watercolored die cuts with the solid hot foiled die cuts from the Dreamy Florals hot foil plate, and then we're going to add those in with those glittery Artistic Blossoms. And I'm just going to kind of arrange this in a swag that's just kind of gracefully floating down the front of my dotted scallop slimline cover plate. And we're just kind of tucking things here and there. I trim off some of these little extra leaves and little sprigs of flowers from the solid hot foiled background, and we're just tucking them in here and there just so that we can create a really, this is a really ornate card. This is not a simple card. And we're using both liquid and foam tape to add tons and tons of dimension. I've got a couple of places where there's a double layer of foam tape, a couple of places where there's just plain old liquid glue so it's nice and flat. We're trying to create tons of dimension and interest on this card because with these monochromatic cards, it's easy for them to kind of look a little bit boring. And so when we add those different elements of metallic shine, we add those different textural elements, that helps to make that interesting. So there's our finished card. We could have added a few gems, but I didn't think it needed it. It was super shiny and glittery and sparkly and just a pink in your face card. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And if you liked the video, maybe hit the subscribe button so that you can see more content from us in the future. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.